I have no other way to think of this than to think of this as a story about madness, because it's not normal. I mean, it's not even normal according to the way in which most revelation takes place. It seems that the history of revelation is full of a certain kind of sweetness. I guess because of my own natural skepticism, it has been easy for me for all of these years not to tell the story of my encounter, because it is mad. And there's no proof. That's the thing that's so interesting about telling stories. It's just a story. And I think it's better that you take it that way. In a sense, it has nothing to do with human design. Human design stands on its own feet. But I was its first student, so I'll tell you the story. I was already mad anyway. I mean, by any standards of what is normal in society, I was already mad. I was living wild. I was very much alone in a process that I didn't even try to understand. I just went along for the ride because there was I just went along for the ride. Yeah, it's my feeling exactly. A sheep in the background, that's nice. I'm a ram, they don't get slaughtered. Anyway, I was already mad. I didn't think about what was really happening to me because it was kind of frightening. I assumed that I had lost it. It was my midlife, and I was aware enough of the way in which things worked that I assumed that, yeah, I was losing it, whatever that meant. It didn't really mean anything to me because, in fact, the thing that surprised me about madness or craziness or whatever you want to call it is that it was entertaining, you know? It's the most interesting thing that had ever happened to me, was to be crazy. To get away from, yeah, all the accoutrement of Western civilization. To just, yeah, break down somehow, deconstruct. Anyway, it was January the 3rd, 1987. I was living in this extraordinary old house, a ruin, a real ruin. It had been built about 300 years ago, and was built over a cistern. It was built over a well. It was built over the water source. The original front door, which when I was living there was no more than an entrance in what appeared to be a courtyard. It wasn't a courtyard, it was just the roof of the entrada of the house. The main living area of the house had collapsed long ago. They ran out of water. You run out of water, you don't stay. You can't grow anything, you can't survive. And slowly the ruina deteriorated, and the people that had owned the property, they had turned the only part of that ruin that still had some infrastructure, they turned it into a kind of guest room. Very simple, small enclosed space. And there was this big, huge wooden door, and this door, it only took one of these giant iron keys, very old-fashioned key, 19th century key. Many years before that, before I even knew what Ibiza was, I used to doodle all the time, and one of the things that I used to draw was this key over and over and over and over and over again. It was almost in every drawing that I had. And I would end up having that key in my hand and living in the room that that key opened the door to. Anyway, it was January 3rd and it was dark. It wasn't late, but you know, it gets dark early in January. It may have been around 5:30. And I'd come back to the ruina. I had received a free meal, which was a treat for me. I didn't eat very often in those days. I was mostly muscle and bone, nothing else. I can remember walking up from the road, from the main tarmac road, and walking up the side of the hill. And there was a little path that I had worn out with my footsteps leading up to the ruina. And I remember Barley Baker, my dog, kind of semi-wild creature. I guess he picked up my scent and he came running down the hill to meet me. And we walked together towards the ruin. That room, the one room in the ruina, it was very simple. It was about, I don't know, maybe 2.5 meters by 5 meters, something like that. And there was a platform in it that I would sleep in. If you opened the door, you'd immediately see that platform. And there was a desk, a kind of board that was over some bricks with a chair. And one wall was all shelves. And on the left-hand side of that wall were books, all kinds of books. And on the right-hand side were jars of herbs. The person that would stay in the ruina was somebody that, when I was living in the main house, I let him stay in the ruina. And it was his books, his herbs. Years later, he would let me stay in the ruina while he was away, and so all of his things were in there. There were some masks made by a French artist, Pascal, local artist here on the island. There were all kinds of strange things. He made hanging butterflies that people would buy in the flea markets. And there was a box of all of his stuff in there. And there was only one key. There was a kerosene lantern that hung over the platform, but it was bone dry, and the only place to get kerosene was on the other side of the island, and I had neither money nor transportation, so I lived a real Aryan life. I got up with the sun, and when the sun went down, I went to sleep. And in fact, that's what I was about to do. I was headed back to the ruina to go to sleep. Yeah, I was born for shock. There was a light on underneath that door. And when the two of us arrived there and I see this light underneath the door, I get a funny feeling. I don't know. Just that odd feeling. I could tell that it bothered the dog too. I had the only key. One of these old-fashioned ones, and nobody else had it, and it was locked. And there was no other way in. And nobody would bother anyway. Not anybody I knew. I was considered the local madman. You didn't come near me. It was spooky. And darkness had settled in. It was really a black night, and it was full of stars. And I shouted at the door. It was my first taste of irony. I shouted, "Who's there?" Well, who was going to find out? But there was no answer. I put the key in the door. Funny about memory. I mean, what happened to me was not sequential. There was a kind of action synthesis that I can deconstruct into components, but it's not the same as what it was to experience it. I pushed the key in the door, I turned the key and I pushed the door open inward and to the left, and I pushed the door open. The kerosene lantern was lit and it was spinning. It's the first thing that I noticed. And at the same moment that I pushed open the door and saw the lantern spinning, my dog, Barley, crossed the threshold of the doorway. And as he crossed the threshold of the doorway, he fell like a creature that's been shotgunned close range. And at the same moment, I heard a voice. It wasn't pleasant as a voice. I kind of imagined it as the voice of a cigar-smoking 155-year-old woman. It was quite a voice. And as I heard that voice, as the dog crashed, as the lantern spun, my body exploded with water. It was gushing from my head. I mean, liquid water gushing from my head, from my arms and my legs and my groin. Everything was dripping water. There was a pool, literally a pool, of my body water on the floor. The physical sensation of dehydration, super fast dehydration, is pain. And in this emerging of the pain was this voice. And it said, "Are you ready to work?" It was not a question. It really wasn't a question. I once thought it would be very funny to do this as a comedy routine, you know? Because it's funny in a way. Madness always is. The dog was lying on the ground in this pool of my water, and the voice said to me, "Move it out of the way." So I moved it out of the way. I dragged the dog under my desk and put it there. It would be there for 8 days. It would never move. Didn't seem to be breathing. And closed the door. And I closed the door. Instructions. I'm a manifester. If you tell me what to do, the chances are I will never pay attention to you again. And here I was in a situation where I was almost like an obedient dog, a frightened one. The pain was interesting. It was intense, but not unbearable. And my skin, I couldn't touch it. I couldn't feel it. Sort of like what happens to you when your leg goes to sleep and, you bang on it with your fist and there's nothing there. The voice told me to do things. And the first thing that I had to do is that I had a butane stove, with 2 little burners on it. And I was told to light the fire on the stove, so I lit the fire on the stove. Science fiction. The lights. I start the fire on the stove, and as I start the fire on the stove, the hair goes up on the back of my neck. And there's this neon blue light, about that big, hovering in the middle of the room. I mean, just hovering. The voice says, follow the light, which today is very funny. So I follow the light. And up until that point, throughout my deconstruction period, I had worn a mufti, Arab headdress. And there was a Buddha shroud that somebody had brought to me from Burma that was hanging on the wall. And the light went over to the Buddha shroud, so I put the Buddha shroud on. And then the light went over to the library. It pointed out 3 books. One was a King James version of the New Testament. One of them was the Bhagavad Gita. And one of them was a Stanford biology textbook. Well, under instruction, I placed all of these things on my platform. There was a woven chessboard made out of leather. And there was a copper coil of wire that was used by the man who lived there, was used to make these butterflies. And there were all these various things that I gathered and placed on the platform following this line. And then I was told to take herbs from the shelves. I had no idea what was in these jars. He was a herbalist and had scoured all over the island for all kinds of different roots and herbs, and he made all kinds of strange concoctions. I was not familiar with any of it. And the light would go to various jars, and I would take the contents and I would put them on top of the stove, directly on top of the fire, and they would burn. Slowly the room began to fill with smoke. And then I put on the mask, Pascal's mask, one of the 2 masks in the room, cracked mask, crack right down the middle, right across the nose, a kind of comedy dell'arte mask. So you have to see the scene and you have to appreciate it for its madness, eh? Madness is such drama. So there I am sitting cross-legged on my platform, wearing a Buddha shroud over my head and a cracked mask, and the smoke of burning herbs. And in front of me is this chessboard with a coil. In the middle of the coil are all of these books. And then the strangest thing of all, the light goes to the very, very top of the bookcase, over on the right, what appeared to be an orange crate. So I have to climb up onto the desk even to reach it, and I climb up on the desk and I pull down this box, and inside this box are half-made butterflies, butterfly wings, big butterfly wings like this, painted, hand-painted on canvas. The kind of things that, you pull a cord and they flap up and down. So there was all these butterfly parts. And as I'm looking in the box, this hovering neon light comes swooping in and goes down to the box and sits on the bottom where there is a bedding of newspaper. So I reach down and pull out the newspaper. It was a local publication from Mallorca, the Mallorca Daily Bulletin. And the front page was the story of the Mexican earthquake. It had taken place in December, just before my encounter. And on the front page is the story of Israel Diaz. It's one of those anagrams, Israel. The story of Israel Diaz trying to dig out his pregnant wife from underneath this rubble, and she stays there for 8 days. And it's the story of how he gets her out and saves her and the baby. And I take this front page of this newspaper and I place it on top of this whole conglomeration of things on my bed. At the foot of my bed, I had been introduced to theosophical thought, and I was investigating ray charts, very kind of obscure thing. And I had all of these examples of some of the people that I knew. And the voice told me to go get one of these charts specifically, of a man who was, well, an acquaintance of mine. And he said to me, put it on the fire. I put the graph, the chart, on top of the smoldering herbs under the flames from the gas bottle, and went back onto the platform and just sat there. And I could hear voices. It was very strange. I could particularly hear Spanish voices, Spanish-speaking voices. Couldn't quite make out what was being said. I was too astonished by what I was looking at. I was looking at a piece of paper sitting on top of flames, and it wasn't burning. I mean, just wasn't burning. And while it wasn't burning, there were all of these sounds, voices, noise. At some point, I got very, very tired. I mean, yeah. And then I was given what was to be one of 3 mantras that I was given. I have no idea what it meant. Anyway, I repeated it a number of times, and the paper exploded into flame, disappeared. I fell back onto the platform. I was exhausted. Funny thing, too, felt like I was levitating because I couldn't feel my body touching the platform at all. Nothing. And then the voice began to teach me. And it was wonderful, because when it spoke, I had no pain. There was just this kind of floating in a information field. The story of the Big Bang, Reyv-Kosmology style. The mechanics, the crystals of consciousness, the nature of being. I'd never heard anything like it.